This is the mounting plate for the Z stage and the electronics. It sits inside the machine, so you don't see it when you're looking at the outside of the machine. And it sits in the machine in this orientation. So this is the front of the panel and back, right hand side, left hand side. So this little cutout here is for the fan. There's a little etched arrow at this leading edge. That's pointing to the front of the machine. So the fascia of the machine is here. And the writing, the etched writing on this panel is on the top surface. So the orientation of this is really important. You don't want to get to that point of assembling all of these modules together and finding that it's upside down. So first thing I'm going to do is put these bearings in place. These are 5mm inner diameter, 11mm outer diameter, and they're a flanged bearing, so that there's a little flange on the base of that. And we're going to put that on the back, or mount these from the back of this panel. And they just mount into these two holes in the corners. And they're a really tight fit, so you will have to press them quite tightly into that. Press them all the way in so that they really seat well. So you'll notice if you just push it down onto the table, it's not seated properly, it's sticking out from the plate. So we need to push it all the way in. I find that if you turn it back over the right way again and give that a really solid push, that they will have seated correctly. So now that that's done, I'm going to put this little panel on here. This is just held in place by two little M3x6 flathead screws, and this goes on the right side up. This is just a little guide for a belt tensioner. I'm going to grab this M3x16 button head and put one of these flanged bearings, the 3mm inner diameter, 10mm outer diameter flanged bearings, and they face towards each other like that. Now that's really important. And then I'm going to take this little M3 washer and pop that on there. That's also very important that that's there. This won't spin if that washer isn't in place, so we need to make sure that that's the setup. Flip that over the other way. So this goes on the back face, and then we take the square nut, pop that there, and do that up. So now you can see that square nut is held in place by this little race here, and we can adjust this without having to get to the other side of without having to get to the inside of the machine. Next thing I'm going to do is mount the stepper motor in place. So NEMA 17. I'm going to face it so that the wires come out in this direction towards the fan, towards the back and the fan. We only need 2 screws to hold that in place, and these are M3 by 6 button heads. So like that. So there'll be 2, as long as you do opposite holes, it should hold in place really securely. Now the next thing I'm going to do is put the pulley in place. Now you'll notice there's a flat on the shaft of the stepper motor. That flat needs to coincide with one of these little grub screws. So if you can see the grub screw there. Now I'm going to swap out my Allen key to a 1.5 millimeter Allen key, and I'm just going to space this so it's an Allen key width from the base, and then screw that in place to the flat. Oops. And then do up the other one. You don't need 2 grub screws. You'll get away with 1 grub screw if you're missing one. Now I'm going to put this mounting plate for the electronics in place, and you'll notice that there's some writing on here. This says face to front, and there's a little arrow pointing that way. It needs to go this way. It needs to be oriented up in this direction so you can see all of the etched writing, and it sits on here like this. So I've got some M3 by 25 button heads. I'll put one of those in. There's three holes here. And I've got some 6mm spacers which sit on here. Now the holes are a bit tight on some of these, which is good in some respects because it holds it in place when you go to mount it. Now I'm going to face that to the front. This will sit on here. Before we do that, I'll just get this in place. Don't over tighten these because they will strip the thread. So you can see it says face to front, there's an arrow pointing to the front there and an arrow pointing to the front there. Now I'm going to mount the Arduino in place. And that sits here. There's 2 M3 by 6mm button heads. There's 2 little location holes on this panel. Don't over tighten these. You don't want to crack the board. Now that that's in place, we can put the ramps board in place. We want to make sure that this back double row sits in the female header connectors, and then we'll just squeeze that in place, making sure that it's all in place like that, down nice and tight. Next thing I'm going to do is just pop this cable tie in. Probably should have done it prior to putting the mounting bracket in place. It is a bit more difficult doing it this way, but not impossible. but it is very difficult to get this in place after the rest of the machine has been assembled. So it's important that it gets popped in there at the outset. Now there's just two more things to do. On this front face here, you'll notice these two little slots. These little brackets hold the PCB of the screen, so it just slots down into these. Now they just sort of rest in there. We're going to glue them in place with some PVC primer. It's a relatively simple exercise. The PVC primer just wicks into these holes and melts the plastic together, so it's a chemical bond. So I'm just going to put a dab of that on there and there, and we'll wait for that to bond. It'll take about 20 minutes or so.